and Albatross here again with the Cypher Unlimited crew. We have our usual suspects of AD or Alpha Dean. We have Spigs18 or Anthony. And Dean, what are we doing here today?
Well, as the title says, we're going to talk about the Cypher System mindset. I personally call it the paradigm shift. You know, we've talked about this before. There's an article over on Angel Citadel that I wrote, a blog about it. But the thought process is that Cypher System, you have to step outside of your typical thought processes that other RPGs or precedents that RPGs have. So what the Cypher System mindset might be defined as is relinquishing all holds on what you used to do and building from that place, building from the ground up. And I think that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about it in all aspects and stuff like that. But Anthony's going to go into it a little bit more. And
hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the CU. Last week, our friend GM Sprinkles, he did a great YouTube video. He was discussing the Cypher System mindset from a player's perspective. It was super well done and very informative. You really should go check it out. We'll provide the links to this video in our description section. But it got me thinking, like, what exactly is the Cypher System mindset and how does it relate and affect all aspects of gameplay? How is it different from other systems? And why is it important to understand this gaming philosophy to truly maximize your Cypher sessions? Our very own Alpha Dean, he actually wrote a blog post on Agent Citadel's website where he loves to say, the paradigm shift in your thought process. So we're going to dig deep into that. So for the sake of this discussion, we would love to break it down into a few categories. I figure we'll talk about game mechanics. We'll talk about player agency. We'll talk about GM agency, narrative control, and finally the pillars of gameplay, because that's very important. And hopefully, after this discussion, we can have a better understanding of what exactly is this shift in, philosophy.
Perfect. Okay, well, let's get it.
Let's dive right in, yeah.
Let's start off with game mechanics.
So
what the first kind of question we'll ask ourselves when, we're talking about game mechanics?
So when we're talking about this topic and we want to, talk about game mechanics, first easy question is, how do the game mechanics of Cypher System encourages mindset? There's a lot of different things that do it. There's, again, a ton of things give players a control of the narrative in ways that other systems don't, or ways to accomplish things within the bounds of their characters that again, I don't have as much experience with other systems as my two counterparts here, but Cypher System always felt to me like I could really do anything if I tried hard enough. And the mechanics of the game backed up my character trying really hard. And we can break down those mechanics pretty easily. One of the main ones...
before you do that, let's touch on the mindset first off.
Well, sure. Let me. I got a thing to say about it if I was done.
Oh yeah, no, I was basically just gonna start talking about the mechanics, but yeah, you can go ahead.
Well, go ahead. You want to talk, Dean, or you want?
Yeah, I was gonna say that the game mechanics for Cypher System support the narrative ideology. Cypher System is a narrative game. It's a story. It's more about evocative experiences as opposed to I'm going to sit here and roll dice to play a game. It kind of wants to push you away from the ideology of me, player versus GM, or I have to min-max my character. It really encourages a mindset of story. So you want rich, compelling, and fleshed out, flawed characters, and then the GM in the same expanse or same place is thinking about building the atmosphere. And so that is really what these mechanics support. This is where they take you to a place where you really get to sit there and edge of your seat, and you get to remember the scene and Captain America, Winter Soldier, you know, when he's holding the helicopter, he's on either side, you get the.
I mean, you kind of move it a little forward.
But I'm just saying, you get those feelings. Go ahead, Al. Go ahead, Ant.
I think that the biggest thing I would say is that the difference in mindset and philosophy to me is that most other systems, and Cypher's not unique in this. I'm not gonna like say that, but the biggest thing I'm gonna say is that most other systems relies and leans heavily on mechanics to move the narrative forward. Like everything has to be based off a mechanical element. Cypher System and other narrative games lean more heavily on player and GM agency to move the story forward. So, like, where it lacks in multiple mechanics, it makes up for in the mechanics it do have. It gives players and the GM agency to change the narrative more frequently and easy without having a mechanic getting in the way of things.
I like what Spring says. Many systems, I mean, not many. I mean, the infinite construct. I like what he said. Many systems falls into playing the rules, and that's a really good point. A really good statement to make. I dig that.
Yeah, I was gonna say that what Anthony was saying is really eloquent, in that a lot of the stuff, and you see the discussion a lot, wherever, Reddit or the Discord server, where people are like, I can't seem to find a rule for X, or I can't seem to figure out so and so for Cypher System Numenera or whatever have you, and all the advice really circles back to, bringing the question back to them, like, how would you rule it? Like, how would it make sense to you to rule that special little instance? Because it's more about making it make sense for the narrative, for the players, for the setting, whatever have you, than having the whole situation dictated by rules or whatever have you, by looking back and reading the rules or whatever have you. The Cypher System is set up that you can kind of come up with things on the fly very easily, and it keeps the narrative flowing quite well, instead of having to look back and like, oh, you're trying to like talk to an NPC who doesn't like you too much, but they're like this many feet away. Like, you don't have to look up these particular instances, because you can just rule it on the fly with how Cypher System is.
It's honestly like the game itself really encourages a level of creativity, if for lack of better terminology. It encourages you as GM and player to say, hey, this is cool. How about this? Or how about that? You know, we are all three. We love to go, well, how does that look? You know, somebody says, I'm getting ready to throw, well, how? So those things, and I think the mechanics of the game truly kind of encourage that.
So when you said mechanics of the game, that's a perfect lead into like the actual question we asked, right? So let's break down some of the key mechanics that we think help the Cypher System mindset and encourages a break away from reliance on mathematical numbers and more on agency of players and GM. So the first mechanic that comes to mind would be effort and edge. How does that affect the Cypher System mindset?
Well, effort and edge is perfect. That's probably one of the most perfect idioms to throw out there, because when you think about it, that's those are those points where you're looking at a character who, you know, would be good at something, or they have a agency towards that particular type of functionality. You know, you have a character. You watch a movie with Jackie Chan, he's dexterous. You know, now in D&D terms, we be going, oh, that's an 18 dexterity and this, and, you know, and you're going with all these modifiers and so on and so forth. Whereas with Cypher System, you just say, hey, he's got an edge in dexterity. You know, he might even have a power shift in dexterity, you know, and he can always, when it comes to those things, it's easier for him to apply. You know what? And it's just automatically across the board. We know if he applies a dexterity edge to anything that's related to doing something, you know, related to his agility, it's easier for him.
You see, I think it encourages the mindset, instead of relying on a mechanical component like a number, like what you said, like a target number, right? It changes your thought process of hey, it's not necessarily I need, I need to be a +5 in this
Right.
athletic ability, but it's like, Cypher's more of a cinematic style game, so it's more like, hey, I'm gonna try harder and I'm gonna really push myself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's not a number behind it. It's more like, hey, I know that I'm applying this effort. I'm a pull from my pool, but I'm gonna give you a narrative, a narrative. I'm gonna do it narratively as opposed to mechanically.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm gonna show my character he's exerting his energy, his all his physical fortitude to accomplish this goal, as opposed to I'm really good because I know I have this +6.
That's a perfect way to put it. And just when I was first gonna lead into the talk about effort and edge, it's such, they're just so elegant when they work. Even like edge can be used for anything, but when you use it with effort, they just work so well together. Especially when I first started playing Cypher System, when I realized I can have control of it's excuse me, I'm getting muddled here. The mechanic pushes the narrative just like you said. It's not like you're not of that mindset of my character's super good at this and I know my role is going to be good. In the narrative you can say, hey, I'm going to try super duper hard at this, and you have this mechanic to back it up. But it's never like I know my role is going to be good because, well, like Anthony said, I have a +5 whatever. I love that, as coming from someone who played mostly D&D and then into Cypher System, that I had more control in the story, like to add to the story. Like I can say, hey, my character is going to show off, or like try really hard, or like you can flavor it so many ways with effort and edge, how your character might be really good at something, or they've trained really hard. There's just so many different like narrative ways to play with how you're applying this effort and edge. It's just lovely.
And when we talk about it, like you're saying, Al, you just kind of brought it full circle when you say that, because you can even get to the point that you reduce it that you don't need a die roll. And then you don't need a die roll. That just gets to go, okay, listen, I do a triple backflip over the chasm, and catch the rope and swing around and kick the guy. Boom, it's done, but I reduced my roll to a 0. I just told the story.
You see, Dean, that right there, what you described is perfect, right? I view it as a player in Cypher System, it's more encouraging to be more descriptive on when you do actions, because it lets the GM know, hey, I'm gonna apply effort. You know what I mean? Without actually having to say it.
Right.
Where, like if you would say, I sit there and really concentrate on the lock. I spent a good 5 minutes. The camera pans on my eye, darting back and forth from the lock keyhole to my hand to my lockpick tools. I'm gonna apply effort, right?
Right.
You adding to the narrative of the story, at the same time, the mechanics encourages you to do so, right? Something like D&D, yeah, you could do that, but it's also a lot easier to say, hey, I'm a +9 in lockpicking. Here's my roll. I rolled a 17. Did I make it?
Right. Exactly. Those are those moments. Those are those moments in game like we've had when we've been playing, and we get to go. Okay, the camera moves around the person. It pans around like in the Matrix. We got bullet time going on, or it's a slow motion scene. All of this kind of stuff that you kind of imagine when you play other games, but here in Cypher System, you're like going, "Hey, let's do it."
And I would even say, as a player, it's a good exercise to every time that you apply effort to do a brief description prior to saying, "Hey, I'm applying effort."
Right.
One, if you play with the same group, the GM is going to be accustomed now that when you give this little brief, like this little brief summary of what actions you're taking, that you won't even have to say it. He or she or they are going to assume that you're applying effort and will state it.
Exactly.
So one thing you said, Anthony, while talking about D&D, made me really clicked in my head for a moment why effort and edge versus plus number is really like immersive, right? So one is passive. You just roll a dice and it's just added. You don't have to say you do anything, right? It's really, there's no interaction. Whereas with effort and edge, you have to say, hey, I'm doing this little bit of extra thing. And usually, like you said, if you, for good practice, you can be descriptive about it. But either way, most of the time, like even let's say a player's like, I want to apply effort. If they're not describing it, you as a GM can be like, what does it look like that you're trying harder? It encourages that discussion and also encourages the player to be a little more descriptive and interactive with what they're doing with the story instead of saying, hey, I got +9. It's, that's my role.
Like,
And it's awesome. Yeah.
yeah, it is. I'm going to address Techman's question. See, here's the thing.
Read the question for YouTube listeners that won't necessarily be here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm still having to weigh by certain examples the descriptive cinematic actions that some players would like to do and how it is feasible or near within the mechanics. When is an action too far off? An action is only too far off is not based on the mechanics. It's based on your setting. It's based on what you're causing plausibility, what plausibility you're bringing in. Because what might be plausible or feasible in a superhero game may not be the same thing that you have in plausibility or feasibility in a slasher game, in a horror movie, or a horror setting, or what you might put up in a fantasy game is not going to be the same thing that you're going to say is plausible in a sci-fi game. These are how you weigh that. That's how I would approach it personally.
Makes sense.
Is that what he's asking, or is it more how far off the action is, like how much stuff you could describe before?
No, from my understanding, what he's saying, because he said, how is it feasible or near with the mechanics? When is an action too far off? An action is only too far off based on your setting, based on your story elements. If you're doing a Sherlock Holmes style story, having your character doing parkour across the rooftops, maybe a little bit far off.
That's how I read the question, honestly. Tankman can elaborate if we're off, but I that's how I read it. Like,
I couldn't say it better than Dean. Dean is totally correct. That's how you would definitely answer that question. But let's move on to GM and player intrusion.
Oh,
how does that encourage Cypher mindset?
So I think that one's a little self-explanatory. So we all know what GM and player intrusions are, and they're like the bread and butter when it comes to this sort of mindset, like interaction with the game. Like, it just, again, as the GM, you have a little way to encourage your players with XP and change the narrative. Like, let's say you have a sudden idea that wasn't in your mind before. You can steer the players towards it with GM intrusions. And then the flip side of the coin, player intrusions. You have something you want to insert into the narrative, bing, bang, boom. You have an XP, a mechanic way to do it. Whereas, again, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't believe D&D really has anything like player intrusions, or there might be another system that does, but as far as D&D goes, I don't think there's anything like a player intrusion. But it's anyway, it's a very awesome mechanical backed way for you to include your own stuff into the narrative, and it really gets you. Again, I feel like at my tables, the player intrusions get the players really invested in the story because now they have a hand in it. They can change it. They can do stuff to it. They're more prone to pay attention to details because now they can change the details.
Yeah, I think what GM and player intrusions does for Cypher System is it allows the narrative to be shared back and forth more frequently than a lot of other RPGs. D&D relies on the DM to control the narrative for the most part. I think that a DM could give out inspiration, but a DM could basically change what the scene is without benefiting the players in any way. Right? Cypher System works a little differently. I think Cypher System allows the GM to change the story in a direction that they seem fit, but they have to pay the players to do so. And the players, in turn, could take agency of the narrative, right? Right? They'll take the narrative for a little bit, but at a cost. So there is a mechanical, by giving away this XP, which is a resource, right? The narrative goes back and forth, a lot more freely in games like Cypher System, games like Fate, games like Fantasy Flight, that utilizes these, like, I'm gonna take the narrative for a second. Here's something I'm paying for, a back and forth. More D20 based games are more GM dependent on the narrative, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a fact.
I look at it, and I'm not disagreeing with either you, Al, or you, Anthony, because I do agree with that. But I think it's also another aspect too, and I think that's where the two ideas kind of diverge, but they end up converging anyway. They go in two opposite directions, and that's the direction when you come at it from the GM intrusion aspect. The GM has the reins of his game. He doesn't have, with a GM intrusion and the fact that we don't roll dice, you don't have to worry about fudging dice rolls. You don't have to worry about, when the players do something and take themselves in an opposite direction and all of that. You don't have to like bend the rules and figure out a mechanical way to redirect them. GM intrusions give you that power hands down. It also takes you out of the mindset that whenever something happens, especially die rolls of a 1 or something, it takes you away from the mindset of a negative. Where other games have encouraged, oh, you roll 1, it's a fumble. Oh, you're fucked. You broke your sword. Whatever the case may be. It takes you away from that ideology as well. So, as a GM,
I was just about to mention that, Dean. That's an awesome point, right? A GM intrusion is not rolling a 1 in D&D, and that's a misconception or a confusion that a lot of players that come from D20 based games when they play Cypher System. GM intrusion is the only thing it is. It's a sudden change in the narrative, right?
And that's what I'm saying. And I think it makes
or negative. It's just a change in the narrative.
And I think it makes you a better GM as a whole, because now you get away from that mindset. You just realize that a GM intrusion is a complication, a change of narrative, a change in motion. Now, the opposite side, why I say they diverge, a player intrusion is just that. A player intrusion 99.9% of the time brings a positive to the player. It brings a positive to the player that you as a GM may not necessarily think about. Now there can be some negatives into it too, depending on the person, if they want to add, a real flavor to the story. Go ahead, Al. Anthony, you're about to say something.
I was going to say that most players play it that way.
Well, that's it, 99% of the time.
I view player intrusions as threefold. One, it's your way of benefiting, like your group, if your guys are in trouble and you need some sort of benefit, right? Which is the standard way of doing it. Two, it's helping out. Player intrusions help out your GM. Well, and I don't care how experienced a GM or how great of a GM, there's lows in gameplay in almost every session. And an experienced player could recognize that, or see if a GM is going off the rails, or if there's like the story's getting a little stagnant. That an experienced player could use a player intrusion to put the game back on course, right? Which I think a lot of players, a lot of experienced Cypher players realize that as a tool. And the third one is, it's a good way of interacting with other players that are shy at the table. Mm-hmm. Right? I use player intrusions all the time when I notice that there's only 1 or 2 players interacting with the narrative, and there's 1 or 2 players that are not, and it's not because they don't, they're not enjoying themselves or they don't enjoy the game, right? It's that they're not comfortable with jumping in or interrupting with someone, and I'll use a player intrusion for strictly a social interaction. You know what I mean? Like, hey, can I waste a player intrusion and say that, I know that a relative of this character, and I want to bring this up. I want to bring this up to this character to spark his discussion.
It's definitely An awesome way to use player intrusions. And that just how you broke it down just further illustrates the point that the player intrusion and also the GM intrusion, but the player intrusion really reinforces that Cypher mindset of, hey, it's not me versus you. We both get to
We're
like
telling
tell
a
the
story.
story together. Like I can tell part of the story, you tell part of the story. We can both change parts of it when there's a mechanic behind it. Like it's amazing.
Well, it's kind of cool, and I'm going to kind of save the point, but it's going to relate to the next topic Anthony brings up in just a second. I just wanted to say something to Jam X Runner. I'd have to disagree that fourth edition skill challenges. I would only say maybe 5% because skill challenges can be used for any game if you're smart with them. Cypher isn't about skill challenges. Cypher is about the narrative. You know what I'm saying? And unfortunately, fourth edition was very gamey, very much, about a system, about systemology, if you will. So
I mean,
away
this
from
is
that.
a fourth edition video, but I will say this: fourth edition did have a lot of innovative stuff.
Oh, it did. Don't get me wrong. Even though I hated it, but it did.
Funny how there's some stuff in fifth edition that people love.
That's
but
from fourth edition.
when it was invented in fourth edition, but
But they changed the name. They were smart.
Oh.
Go ahead, Al. Bring up our next point.
So, and
Go ahead, Al.
no, I was just gonna move down the line here. So, some other mechanics that really promote that Cypher System mindset, is the character creation. There's so much stuff that goes into character creation that really invests your like the player into the narrative at hand. There's like player connections, there's character backgrounds, there's so many different parts of the character that can be influenced by the narrative or influence the narrative. Like this is where you as the player give your GM seeds. This is where you as the GM look for seeds, encourage the players to like be connected to one another. How do you know that player? What's your connection? Like and again, this is that like pure Cypher mindset of like pushing the narrative forward together and not as opposed, it's not a competition between GM player. It's not this whole like, we're trying to defeat each other. We're telling this awesome story together, and this helps again at the beginning of that story, or even like for whatever mid later, gives you seeds to play with. Like this is that fun time where you can like come up with awesome stuff that you can play with other players, the GM can play with for the story. It's just awesome all around.
Character creation, I think, is one of the most interesting Cypher System mindset mechanics. I think with character creation, it's 75% narrative fluff on your character, 25% mechanical, right? A lot of other systems, it's more flip. It's more 75% mechanical, but like how am I gonna break the balance
Min-max.
of my character? And we had this discussion in our game balance issue, a game balance episode. I'm a firm believer that Cypher System isn't balanced, right? And it's not balanced purposefully. It's not balanced to encourage the player to not necessarily try to min-max, but to come up with the most creative and innovative character they possibly can. And in Cypher System, when you're building your character, you're building personality, instincts, emotion first, and then you follow through with mechanics, if that makes any sense.
I mean, that is the intended way, but I have heard stories of people playing it the other way, but yes.
Yeah, but we talked about the mindset.
I know the mindset, yes.
No, and that's what I was going to say. The mindset, if you really think about it, that's one of the major, that's probably the biggest area for players where the paradigm shift comes into play, because you build characters from concept, not from game mechanics. You build the character from this image, this picture, the story, versus how many points of damage can I do, or how easy is it going to be for me to sneak and stealth, or how good am I going to be at casting spells, or whatever the case may be. You're building the character from a thought process, from a story element. Like, just when I sit down to write a story versus me sitting down to play, Dungeons and Dragons or Savage Worlds or something like that that has a strong mechanical baseline, and I think that's where, people have got to, breathe in the whole idea of stepping away from, as we were saying earlier, min-maxing. Anthony talks about the lack of balance, and me and him have gone back and forth about that. I believe it is totally balanced because it is balanced. I believe that's the beauty of it, because certain things are the same with every character sheet, but hey, it is what it is.
If you want to see this debate, we have a video on game balance where me and D go at it. We have very different philosophies of what the do.
But it was crazy. As much as different philosophies as we have,
it comes back to the same point, basically.
But I'm saying, it makes the same point. We can actually game together and have a blast doing it. It's just approaches of and thought processes,
Wazir Khan put it the best, I think. Said focus on the narrative, figuring out the crunch later. That's a perfect way of saying it.
Yes. So,
and I like what Infinite Contract said, it's like multi-classing on steroids.
Exactly. It's awesome. It's always fun to come up with an idea for a character, right? You get told the story by the GM, like, hey, this is what the setting you're going to play in is. Here's like maybe a small plot hook or whatever, and then you get the wheels turning in your mind, like, hey, who am I going to fill in this world? Who am I going to become? And then you flesh out a really cool idea, and then you get to look at the book and fill in the blanks. And there's really not like Anthony said, it's mostly like flavorful stuff on your sheet, and then you have some abilities and like the mechanical stuff. But like all the stuff that you can pull together from your descriptor, your type, your focus, all that stuff feels very narrative. Like you feel like you're creating this actual character in this story. You're not just creating a dragonborn paladin. You're not just creating a whatever cleric. Like you're creating this.
That's the point, though, Al. You're making a perfect point, because the point is, you write a sentence. When you write that sentence, when that sentence is completed, all you have to do is refer back to the sentence, and you know what the character is. It doesn't just describe the character, it is the character. And that's one of the beautiful things about it. It's I love it. It makes me feel good. That's all.
Eloquent, succinct,
Eloquent,
very
exactly.
nice.
Simple but so eloquent. So let's move on.
Hold on a sec. The mindset, though, I think is important. We talk about this in character creation because we're talking about having this Cypher mindset, right? The first time you created a Cypher System Numenera character, something based on Cypher System, I'm not going to lie. I had that mindset that let me make like this optimal, not necessarily optimal, but a functioning character, right? Mm-hmm. The more games you play, and your mindset, gradually changes, you realize it's not about functionality, it's about fleshing out a complete character.
And
right?
JMX Runner, I have to disagree with you. I've taken complete newbies and brought them to Cypher System far easier than I have ever brought someone who's ensconced or ingrained in other games.
Well,
New players, and this is my personal experience. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying
in some ways, it's kind of hard. New to role playing.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, new to role playing, Cypher System is a lot easier because
that's what I'm saying. That's what I just said. I said players that I know. I said players that are new to gaming versus players who have been staunched in other things. If they're D&D players and all of that kind of stuff, it's hell. It's a fight. But if they're new to gaming in general,
but that's not what Jack said. He said new players to the system. So
yeah.
You're not...
Okay. Well, I apologize.
Either way, now I forgot what I was gonna say. What were we saying now? Like y'all got me all derailed now.
Oh, I was actually getting ready to go to our next point. Our next.
Let's do it. Oh,
The point I was trying to make is before you guys, um, I want to know from chat, right? Do you think that your mindset has changed from when you first started creating characters in Cypher System to now? Like, now that you have experience building characters, have you or do you view it differently? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about the Cypher System mindset. Does your mindset change the way has it changed the way you create characters?
I can answer this real fast.
Yeah.
What you call it? When I first started, like I mostly played D&D 5e with you. I think you say we played some 3.5.
Yeah.
I hardly remember it. I'm gonna be honest. I mostly remember the 5e. So I came from playing 5e, and then we went into Cypher System. When I was creating, like whenever I thought of D&D or role playing games, I always thought of like you're making a guy with a class, a guy with a race, all like it's very like almost cookie cutter. Like, you're gonna be a fast bard or whatever have you, right? It's nothing, you can't get too crazy with it. I mean, of course there's multi-classing, but that's later on. When I moved into Cypher System, it was like something like, it's like Dean always puts, is that paradigm shift hit almost immediately. Like, so not much has changed for me personally, because I started seeing that. But like, you want to have characters from a story, not these what is it, proficient heroes. You want to have characters with flaws, with personality, not like a killing machine or like the most diplomatic man ever. Like, you know what I mean? They're these like individuals you're trying to flesh out. And I came into the game kind of with that already, which was, again, Cypher blew that like that whole mindset away from me. Like, D&D was fun and all that because it has like that same elements of storytelling and whatnot, but I always felt like the mechanics and other things got in the way. But as soon as Anthony introduced me to Cypher System, like that, again, the paradigm shift was like immediate, and it was just so
And
awesome.
I mean, and now you're special. That's all I can say. And I'm not saying that as a bad thing, because if anybody goes and reads my article, and I've said it 1,000 times, I had Numenera for 2 years before I got it. Before I knew it was special, I knew it was something I wanted to figure out. But it took me 2 years to get it. I had to break habits. I had to step away because I had been doing it for so long, doing the other thing for so long. You were lucky enough to get a taste, and then this was introduced to you. You were able to get it,
He was lucky enough to get a fabulous GM to introduce him to role playing games.
So, but Al, everything you just said is perfect segue to talk about player connections.
Oh, I was gonna say, I'm 100% in agreement with Dean. I was the same exact way as Dean. I needed to break, break my mindset. When you've been gaming as long as me and Dean have, you get stuck in, character creation being a certain way. And I got into narrative games later in my gaming career. Like when you kind of started almost with narrative games.
Yes, that is true.
We grew up on tactical games. So you sort of like, we had to break our mindset.
Yeah, so I will say that I guess that is a huge boon, and I guess a huge lending to why I already was sort of half foot or whatever, halfway in the door for that mindset. But just seeing the narratives, not the narratives, the mechanics and whatnot that Cypher System presented after seeing the stuff that D&D presented it was a whole different game, like a whole different ballpark. I mean, like everything was, either way, yes, thank you, Anthony, for being such a great GM.
Yeah. And that takes us, like I said, right into player connections. Al, you were saying it. You said it a couple times about player connections and how rich that is. That's something that a lot of games don't necessarily encourage. 9 times out of 10, you sit down at a table. I've done it. I was guilty of it. Okay, so do you guys know each other or not? And then at the table, instead of having a session 0, this is something that Cypher System has encouraged, the ideology of a session 0. But then you get to flesh out character connections. Character connections bring that other story element to the table. That's canon for the GM to work with. No matter what story he's telling, whether he's telling a one shot, or he's planning to run a multiple session campaign. The character connections are awesome because they don't even always have to be positive connections. It could be, this is the guy down the street that used to bully me, and I can't stand his punk ass. You know, or this is the girl that I wanted to date. And she always made me look like an idiot in high school. All of these things are like awesome aspects that you can play with. So character connections, again, it's another avenue to shift your mind away from, I need to worry about the math.
Oh,
So
just a little funny story, just to add in, like, I guess a personal anecdote about this, what we're currently talking about. What you call it? My players in my home game, which I guess RIP, I don't know if we're ever playing again, but one of their connections was the rogue had stolen something from the family of one of the other players, and like he kind of keeps it a secret. So like he secretly has this like family heirloom of another player. So like you can have like so many fun little like additions to the story. Like it's just awesome. Like the sort of things you can have.
so
Anthony,
let's
you're
move on.
muted.
You know how just recently, like the big boys in gaming started adding connections into like their character creation, and I think that this is one of those mechanics that narrative games has been far and away above the curve when it comes to
Knocking it out the park.
building boundaries. And now the more mechanical games are starting to realize how important it is to add a mechanic that makes it a lot easier to encourage role play, especially in the earlier sessions. It gives a reason for the players to want to be together in the first place. Like, and the mindset that one gets when they're creating a character, and they have to start thinking about, hey, how am I relating to these other players that I'm playing with? And when you do it in character creation, during the first session, you could immediately jump into the social narrative, social interacting, because you already have a lead into that. You know what I mean? Instead of having to work it out, at the game table, half the work has been done for you.
What's crazy about what you're saying, Anthony, is I find that almost every first session of a game, especially if I'm going to run a multi-session game, just about every first session ends up being 90% RP and 10% dice rolling, because the players dive right in and grab the narrative by the neck. It's so cool.
And it's like little things you say. Like, you could say, hey, the game is starting. By the way, 5 minutes before the game, I could say, hey, you're related to this person somehow. How are you related?
Yep.
Don't tell me now. Tell me in game.
Mm-hmm.
And then just start your adventure.
Yep.
The first 10 to 20 minutes, usually the player's going to think it through. And as the story plays out, they're just going to throw it into the narrative.
Right.
I love how characters interact with each other organically, and those connections are a tool that encourages that.
And that takes us right into our next topic, which is player agency.
Exactly.
And that's one of the biggest things that gives players agency. We were saying, what impact do players have on the game that differs from other systems? Like I said, one of the biggest things for me is just noticing, my first session. I ran a mini superhero campaign, and I literally had to throw an action sequence in as a GM intrusion to get it started, and that was at the end of the first session. The first session was all interaction, and it impacted the game so beautifully because the players by that point, they were in, and everybody was like, okay, next session. So that's one of the things I say. The impact is huge. It's magnificent, and I love it.
It's so awesome to see, like, there's so many little things that Cypher System does that really gives the players that agency. Like, and again, coming again, I don't really have really played D&D, and Anthony was a very nice GM, but just mechanics as presented, like you have so many opportunities, even starting at character creation, to input into the narrative. It's wild. And not to mention again player intrusions, like what you call it, rolling 19s and 20s, like all this stuff gives the players little ways to it, like again, it encourages that not me versus you, that us mentality of we're telling this story together. That hey, I can input into the story too. Like again, with the player connections, you can say, hey, I'm related to this person this way. You can make it up with the player. Like that encourages you having a dialogue with this person, whether in character or not. How do we know each other? Like it, like, and then with the player intrusions, like if you ever feel like there's a strong moment or a way you feel the narrative could go, you have a mechanical way to do that. And again, I don't have much knowledge of other systems, but I feel like I haven't heard of many other systems that have mechanics that really give that much agency to the player. Like this level of agency is kind of wild outside of like maybe Fate or whatever it's called. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of other straight narrative games that it's all about player agency, you know. But I think the biggest difference, like how does it impact and differs from other systems, is that Cypher in other systems, right? Like player agency is a yes and tool for the GM, right? You know, a yes and. What I mean by yes and is, hey, can I do this? Yes, and this is what happens, right? Or yes, or no, and this is why, right? In Cypher System, it's not necessarily always yes and, it's, hey, I'm giving you this, and this is happening. The player is not asking for permission. The player is using the mechanics to change the narrative. You know, so it's sort of like I'm exhausting my resources. I'm using a player intrusion. I'm using a short-term benefit, a long-term benefit. All those mechanics are built in to say, hey, look, we're trapped in this puzzle. Here's a long-term benefit. Here's 2 XP. I know ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. I'm going to figure out this writing.
Right. And here's another aspect to that.
In other systems, there will be like, hey, can I say I know ancient Egypt? And then it's up to the DM to decide. Cypher System is up to the player.
And that's what I'm saying. That's another aspect of that being part of the narrative, because you know what, you don't know when you're creating this character. Let's just say you sit down and you know what, you're gonna go, I'm creating I don't know, I'm creating a character that keeps the magic ally, you know, and my character is, you know, like Indiana Jones. So you're not going to sit there and try to compile a list of skills and a list of ideologies and so on and so forth. You don't do that. Cypher's not built that way. It's built for it to work within the narrative. So you go, you know what? And guess what? Here go 3 XP. I want my character to know a hidden magic script, you know, and it's written on the item that holds my magic ally. And then you go, and the GM go, okay, that's cool. Now y'all just made a whole nother aspect to the game together. GM said yes, player gave you this. Now you can have this script show up later on in the game, you know, and he might need his item that he holds his magic creature in, and that might be the cipher for him to figure out the writing or something. Just aspects like that are freaking awesome. And you as a GM don't have to do all the work anymore. You ain't got to do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah, it's about the that's the whole thing with the agency, right? It's about flipping the agency back and forth. Like, you know, it's more freeing for a GM to let loose of the reins for a little bit, because most of the time your players are going to come up with something way more interesting or solve a problem that you didn't know existed because of their creativity. And you allow the players to be creative.
And that's why player agency is so important in Cypher System, because they're going to give you, the GM, tools to continue to make the game better, you know, and you give back to them for that, you know, because there are times that, you know what, you guys did it, and I had to go with a full player, and, you know, can I do a mass intrusion? Can I do an all player intrusion? Remember, you guys have put me in that position where I had to go, okay, I didn't need to come up with something. But you guys said yes. I gave y'all XP. Y'all allowed me to make the game better, for everybody. We walk away from the game happy because player agency, you know. So I love it.
Geo Sprinkles mentioned that he has a hard time getting his players to spend XP for anything other than advancement. Right? There's a lot of things you could do. One, you could separate the XP and say, hey, intrusion XP is what you use for player
In game.
in game, and then the XP you get at the end of the session is what you use for advancement. Or two is you could put your players in a really tight pickle, and when they seem stumped and worried, you can say, hey, why don't you spend some of that XP for the intrusion? Like,
Right.
basically tell them. Like, there's nothing wrong with telling them, hey, use your XP for an intrusion. It'll get you out of it.
And another thing about that too, like I was initially of the school of thought to not separate the pools. And then I realized that, what, sometimes you just might have to do that, because if you think about it, other games use the same concept. If you look at, what is it, Savage Worlds, they just call it a boom.
Yeah, but it's the Cypher System mindset, because
right.
the idea of hoarding XP for advancement is the concept of, I'm worried about leveling my character.
Exactly.
I'm worried about the narrative.
And if you start also pointing out to player characters that XP isn't just used for rerolls and stuff like that, but it can be used during the game, which is in forms of character advancement. Because if you get long-term, abilities out of something, by spending 3 XP in the middle of your game or spending 4 XP, you're getting something right in the middle of the narrative. So these are other things, other aspects that you might want to point out to your players.
And it's also changing your mindset of thinking that your character is not the most important thing about the session, but the story is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that breaking of that mind, that's that paradigm shift that the players, it's not about advancement. It's not about min-maxing. It's not about, all of the numbers. And I think that helps.
So I will say something that I did in my home game, and again, I don't normally run campaigns, so it's not like I've tested this throughout many games or anything. But in my home game, we just did milestone advancements. Like all EXP earned can only be used for like the 1, 2, 3 XP stuff, like rerolls, intrusions, like benefits, etc. And then when they hit a certain part of the story where there's a milestone, like they beat a boss or something, or they do something important, then everybody just gets 1 advancement. They pick something as if they were spending 4 XP. Yep. And that kind of completely eliminates that hoarding of XP, because they know they're going to level up at some point because it's part of the story. Again, I can understand why some players don't like that, because they don't control when their character grows, which again, there's a give and take in this situation. The players in my home game were perfectly fine with it, and again, in my game, it encouraged them to spend the XP for story and whatever stuff instead of just hoarding it to level up. So that was a good solution for my table. Again, it might not work for everyone's table, but yeah, just throwing that concept out there.
But that's another excellent thing. Milestones are awesome. I agree, 100%.
So I think we moving on from player agency, and we'll go to the other side of the table, behind the screen. GM agency. What are the differences GMing Cypher compared to other systems, and how important is the agency?
GM agency is easy. It does what it does in Cypher System. It makes your job, it makes my job easy. I think being a GM in Cypher System allows me to focus on my storytelling. I don't have to worry about dice. I don't have to worry about, making characters the same way I make a character on the opposite side of the screen, which is awesome. And it makes my life easy. Other systems, I do just as much work. Actually, I do twice as much work, because if I'm building NPC or whatever the case may be, I got to compare levels and I got to go through this and I got to go through that and I got to dance this jig over here and add this number. With be GMing as a Cypher GM, you know what? Guess what? That's a level 3 character. You need to roll a 9 or better to hit him. Bam, it's done. You know, any ability I want to give him, boom, he's got it. I don't have to dance a jig anymore. And I think that is a huge mountain. You know, that's like the monolith in 2001. You know, you found the secret. So that's my thing when it comes to GM compared to other GM and Cypher compared to other systems. So much easier.
With a mechanically light system, it's like what GM Sprinkle said. You just worry about the story. You don't have to worry about the mechanics, because you know, like a lot scenes, scenarios, you know, adversaries, they all target numbers, right? So you could change a target number, you know, on the fly without thinking much about it. So it opens you up to, you know, to use your brain power to concentrate on the narrative. So it's very freeing. You know, it gives you the what you call it, the wherewithal to not worry about those things and just concentrate on the narrative.
And y'all have failed to, unless I blanked and missed it, y'all have failed to mention one of the biggest aspects of what gives the GMs this like free-wielding agency to really think about the story and whatnot. We don't have to roll dice. Everything's based on what the players are rolling. Like, it's like all up to you. It's like, hey, how well are you doing? How well is your guy doing? It's not up to me. Like, how are you doing with the narrative, right? And again, gives you time to really freely think about the story, how you want it to progress and all that. Just all the stuff about Cypher System just makes the GM's job so easy, which is why I fell in love with it after trying. I think I tried a GM 1 session of D&D 5e, and it was fun, don't get me wrong, but after seeing Cypher System, there was like, after I saw it, I was like, there's no way I'm ever DMing D&D again. Like, and I haven't. Like, there's literally no way I'll play D&D again. I don't think I'd ever DM it again.
I think it's a different sort of work, though, right? Yeah. I think, like, DMing Cypher is a lot less upfront work, you know, a lot less pre-planning work, but there is some sort of, you know, you have to be able to think on your feet a little more. And your prep is a lot more improv prep as opposed to like prepping intrusions and stuff like that. You know, I think the agency for Cypher that's different from a lot of other systems is a lot of other systems you could change the narrative with no repercussion whatsoever, because what you say is the final say, right? Cypher, when you change the narrative, you don't feel like a jerk, good or bad, because you're always giving the player something for that. You know what I mean? Yep. They're receiving something for the narrative changing.
It is definitely nice, and again, for some people who might be like, they want that, like, cooperative nature, and like they want to foster that Cypher mindset, right? In D&D, or excuse me, coming to Cypher System, they now have a way to reward players for kind of maybe screwing with them a little bit, you know? Like, it's not just them being screwed with. Now, they have a way to say, hey, I might be changing the story a little bit from what you were thinking, but here's some EXP. Like, whereas in something, again, I can only relate to D&D because it's the only one I've ever DM'd, you don't really have a mechanic for that. I mean, you can kind of make up things if you're a really good GM, but like, there's nothing really hardwired in the raw to help you out there.
Yeah, well, you know, and you know, I just wanted to ask, Jesus, you made a statement about PBTA games coming from PBTA to Cypher System. I don't understand what you mean that it was more difficult, or you had some difficulty. If you can, you know, kind of drop us a line so I can see some more about what you're saying.
And Infinite Construct mentioned that it's a great idea to play other games. It absolutely is.
Yes.
You should play as many different games as you possibly can. Whether you like them or not, you can understand the thought process of why Cypher was designed a certain way, why 5e was designed a certain way, what aspects of the mechanics was successful or not. You have to broaden your horizons. You play as many games as you possibly can, because who knows, you might find something that, a diamond in the rough that you really really like, and you're only selling yourself short if you don't try, and have an open mind and play other. Edition Wars is for the birds.
I
Yeah,
definitely
look,
need to. Oh, go ahead.
go ahead, Al.
No, I definitely need to play some of these systems that I have just sitting here, like what is it, Mutant Crawl Classics, Shadow of the Demon Lord. Like I've read them a little bit and they seem amazing, but again, yeah, I really need to get on the ball.
Because I've played so many games, I still buy tons of other games, and I will play if somebody is running something. 99% of the time, I'll jump in and play something else. A lot of times, I won't run it, but I'm actually going to start running some other stuff again too, because Cypher, I'm just spoiled. It is what it is. I'm very very spoiled in Cypher System when it comes to you know running games and so on and so forth. But what's happened is now that I'm writing stuff, I have to look at other systems and I have to become much more versed when I'm writing for other systems. So
And also, when you play other systems, you get to see if you want to change your system of choice, like house rule. You get cool ideas from other systems.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, you guys, I don't know if any of you out there, have seen my supplement for Magic, but literally, it was a combination of Savage Worlds and D&D that allowed me to put that together for Cypher System, to put it together in the Cypher System philosophy.
And it's pretty awesome. I know Anthony, and I forget if we recorded this or streamed it. I think we did, but I was recently reading D Genesis, and um, a lot of that stuff was like it's hard for me to say because I've never run it or played it, but it seemed kind of clunky in certain areas, but then trying to move, like, just because again that Cypher mindset of being able to be flexible about what ideas they were trying to present forward, I was able to take it into Cypher System and do sort of the same thing, like, have the same sort of feel they were going for, but still within, except within the Cypher rule set. And again, that mindset is super important, because if I wasn't free to, like, if I didn't have Cypher to fall back on, I would be looking at these maybe somewhat clunky rules, like, what do I do now? Like, is this, how am I supposed to run this? Or like,
I mean, you put a great point out. It's funny. Like I grew up playing a lot of crunchy systems, right? The hero system. Gert,
Palladium games.
Palladium games. But now that I go back and play those games, I play it from a narrative side of things, and you actually make the game better. You know what I mean?
Well,
Because you learn to eliminate the rules that you didn't necessarily need. And Infinite Conflict, I was a huge Palladium fan.
here's something that's funny, because I go all the way back to early D&D, first edition D&D. When I say first edition, I'm talking about the little white box folks, I'm talking about the little pamphlets. It's crazy because the narrative was very important back then. You had to build everything. It was world building at its best, but you had mechanical elements because it was also based on miniature war game. So it was this weird synthesis that came together, but it was always, and that's where the whole idea of GM, DM versus players came from, because it was a competition at the time. Whereas what Anthony is saying, looking at those older systems now and coming from Cypher, bringing it back, it's like I can embrace that so much easier now. And, like we said, tell that story. A friend of mine, his little brother got to play with us one time, and he was so amazed because we were in character. We were speaking as our characters. It wasn't my character does this, no, we were talking back and forth across the table. And he was like, I never saw people do that. Everybody. And I was like, welcome to the big boys. But this is what Cypher encourages too. Get into character. Have a improv acting session at the table. Tell the story.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
definitely
right, Jesus. Exactly, Jesus.
So
Combat and werewolf. Is your opponent a werewolf? No, you win.
Oh
yeah,
boy. Where are we on the notes here?
Oh, we got to go right into narrative control. How is narrative shared in Cypher System compared to other systems?
Again, I'll let y'all comment because I'm just gonna keep
I mean,
talking about
we
D&D. Like,
basically touched about this, but Cypher System is all about moving the control back and forth between the player and the GM. Now, Cypher System is an exercise in sharing narrative control. But all the mechanics lead to it. It actually encourages it with pretty much 75% of what the mechanics are. It's about moving the narrative from the players to the GM back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until you have a cohesive story.
Cypher System is the definition I've been using for role playing games for a long, long time. It's interactive storytelling. This is what it is. You know, um, so how important is narrative control in Cypher then, guys?
it's super important. But what you call it? I had something to say, but now I'm blanking. Oh, something that really drove me to like enjoy Cypher System when I first came over to it from D&D was that aspect of narrative control. Like the fact that me as the player, not, and again, not as much as the GM, but I could tell part of the story too. Like I could describe I mean, again, Anthony encourages at his D&D table for us to describe certain things, but the mechanics of the game, what was encouraging me as the player to do or say or like get in character, or and then with the narrative control, like I forget what it was in our first ever Cypher game, but like we were still like, this was before player intrusions were a thing, and we were still doing it,
You
like,
started doing it,
and
yep.
it was so awesome to have that way of saying, hey, I can pay to do something to the story. It was just so awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Cypher System is all about the narrative control. If you took out the back and forth of if you took out the back and forth between GM and player, then you kind of wouldn't have a system. The system is built on, the intrusion mechanic, the effort and edge, like all those mechanics lead to you going, you having control of the story for a little bit, then the players take it a little bit, So if you took those elements out, you wouldn't have if you took out narrative control, then you wouldn't have a game really.
Well, here's a thought, that I like to, throw out there to everybody in general. We're talking about how we, encourage the story to continue and all of that. But, you know, more so than taking the back and forth out, it takes the confrontation out of the game. It brings the game table really to a place of everybody it's cohesiveness. You don't walk away from the table going, I hate my fucking GM back. Give me that. You know what I'm saying? You don't. I think Cypher takes it takes the railroad out of the GM. It takes the confrontation. Because sometimes you do have GMs that they might be a great GM, but they're, lack of better terms, they're dicks. They're not giving you a chance to, enjoy, or, they're pushing you in a direction. Cypher doesn't encourage that, you know.
You know, I think there's many ways of designing a system, right? And I think Cypher went the route of, we're going to give you a cinematic experience and a little more out there in terms. Maybe that's why the settings are sort of out there, right? Because without having a special group of people that understand how to share a narrative, when you have back and forth narrative like Cypher does, the game could tend to get a little wonky. You know what I mean? Without experienced players that know how to rein themselves in, right? D&D and other systems like that don't want that problem, so their mechanics don't give players the ability to control the narrative as much as Cypher System does.
They've got fences up where
Yeah.
Cypher System has markers. Now this is out of bounds, but if you and the GM want to go there, you guys can go there. So,
And it gives you, Francis is the perfect descriptor for that, Dean. Like they have contingency plans set up to, stop the players from totally going, off the rails. When Cypher encourages you to go off the rails.
That's
yeah,
actually an awesome way to put it.
exactly.
And I know Anthony likes to keep bringing up an example of certain players from a certain one shot that did certain things. I'm not going to reiterate, but that is what Infinite Construct was saying. That the weird part is, again, creative interpretation can go a long way in the wrong hands. So that's why, again, it's important to have consent talks and whatnot before role playing actually gets too crazy, depending on what your setting or genre may be. But yeah, player agency can get a little out of hand in Cypher System if not reined in properly.
See, Raz, again, we've talked about this before. With Cypher System, it's not off the rails. The rails are just not railroad tracks. They're
A roller coaster.
roller coaster tracks. So, you might get a loop-de-loop and a corkscrew when you are expecting just to have a steep drop. That's what we call it.
Chalk Zone would make a great Cypher game. I'm just reading what Jesus said. The Cypher System is just Chalk Zone? Nice. But Chalk Zone would be awesome, actually.
So,
Oh, yeah. I'll let you lead into the next thing.
what are the pillars of gameplay in Cypher, guys? Yeah.
We all know like the three basic pillars of gameplay in Cypher and how your mindset changes to other systems. You have discovery, you have combat, you have social, right? Numenera is the perfect example of how Cypher handles discovery. You know what I mean? It's chock full of.
The game is all about discovery.
Yeah.
Literally, they tell you.
Weird.
I mean, if you think about Numenera was the game that said, you don't earn experience for killing the monster. You earn experience for figuring out what the monster is. You earn experience for discovering its lair. You earn experience, So that aspect means that, discovery for Cypher System in general. And I think if you take it even a step further, if you internalize it a little more, just think about Cypher System is about the discovering how to enjoy Cypher System, to its fullest. And I think that's another aspect that we don't think about, but it's literally about discovering that.
Yeah, it all goes aside with that Cypher mindset that whether you're fighting, whether you're interacting with other players, you're interacting with NPCs, or you exploring the world, right? The story, the narrative takes paramount over everything else. It's not your characters experiencing this, is that we are experiencing this. And I think that's the difference in mindset that someone has to take. If I had to say anything to describe what this whole conversation is about, it's that. It's we are experiencing this together as opposed to my character is experiencing this.
Mm-hmm. And then we move on to talk about. Al, did you want to say something about discovery?
No, I mean, y'all touched on it basically. Just one thing I like to say to players, especially new players to the system, when they first start the game, and I'm like, describing Cypher System as a whole, like just how to play or whatnot, and we get to XP, and I'm just like, I describe how to earn it, right? So when I talk about earning XP for discovery, again, most of the time I run one shot. So like discovery, again, it's finding something cool within the story or progressing the story or whatnot, right? But I also frame it that they can get XP for just doing a discovery kind of on their character, the personality of the character. So if they do something, if they're role playing well, if they do something cool within the story, that's also a way for them to earn XP for discovery, because they're like looking in and discovering their character, how their character would do things. And yeah, that's just one way, another way, at least something I like to do to try to help promote new players or just players in general into role playing more actively and like thinking about how their character would approach a situation, because it could potentially be rewarding.
Right. Jesus, Brilliant Loser, says, I think it is also we are crafting this experience for each other, not that we are just experiencing it.
Excellent point.
That's excellent, which would take us to our next place, which would be combat. And what I say about combat and Cypher System is that it can, no matter what game you're playing, it can always be over the top. It is cinematic. It's not bound by, you know, range increment, 50 feet, 10 feet, 30 feet. You're not worrying about that. You don't need to get your ruler out. You get your imagination out. And I don't think it's just combat. I just say action in general in Cypher System is a it's a beautiful element because you get to do that stuff that implausible stuff that you see in the movie. We all know that, in real life, an explosion has a concussive wave, and if you're within a certain distance, depending on how much C4 is being used or a stick of dynamite or so on and so forth, you're not going to be a happy camper. You're not going to be, shoulder rolling. But in Cypher System, I can do just like in the movie. You know what? I can ride that concussive wave and shoulder roll up and be like, oh, my hip hurt, and that we represent that by giving up, some might points, in my might pool, but I'm still functioning. I can still do that thing, So there, that's my thing about combat.
Combat's a good thing. Combat's something that GM Sprinkles touched on a lot in his video, right? And with combat, right? I think combat and Cypher System and how your mindset changes from the Cypher way is that combat could be as long or as short as you want it to be as players, depending on how you describe things, right? In other systems, right? Combat, like Pathfinder, it's just long. Let's call it for the sake of what it is. The smallest of battles could take an hour and a half if you have 4 or 5 people. Cypher System, it all depends on how you view it. How since it's rolling to a target number, it's how you view it as a player. You know what I mean? How descriptive you are with your, like what Dean said, how descriptive you are with your actions dictates the length of your combat, right? So it's a lot different when someone says, oh, Cypher's too fast. It's only too fast because your guys don't have the Cypher mindset. You said, I roll a hit. Instead of describing what you're doing and sparking the GM with GM intrusion ideas by your descriptions.
As Brilliant Loser decided to bring up, that wonderful game where, the crowbar riding down the giant aquarium.
Oh, just
with the shark, exactly.
But
you hit the nail on the head, man. You get to be creative, you get to be in the moment. And here's another thing about Cypher and combat too. When you think about how the NPCs are built, the NPC level and the hit points that you give those characters are directly related to how fast you want those combats to move as well. A level 3 character, with 9 hit points, hey, that's not going to be a long combat, especially if there's 4 players, even if every player is, using light weapons. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, just that combat allows, again, I only really have played D&D, so it's hard for me to like harken back to any other systems. But in Cypher System, I don't know how. It's been a while since Anthony and I have played D&D. I don't know how flavorful I was with my descriptions when I attacked or healed something because I was a paladin. In Cypher System, the mechanics kind of, again, especially effort specifically, encourage you to be descriptive of what you're doing. Kind of add to the story a little bit. And especially if you roll on like a 19 or a 20, now you're adding to the story even more. How is it happening? What's going on? What's
the minor or major effect?
And combat becomes more immersive that way. It's not just swinging at something until it dies. Now it's this whole cinematic movie thing that's going on. Now people are describing what they're doing. People running off walls, riding explosions. And again, it really depends on the setting and genre, how wacky or whatever it could be. But Cypher gives you the mechanics to make it happen and encourages it. Whereas in other games, they might be encouraged to say, hey, I swing my +2 sword at this, I roll my dice, and that's it. That's my turn. It's really nice. It's a really nice, set piece for a story the way combat is handled within Cypher System. It's not just a video game experience of killing an enemy; it's a set piece in your story.
All right, that's a perfect what Dean when just for people that didn't realize what Dean was talking about with riding the shark. That's from a video that a one shot we did called The Box. And that's a perfect example of the way you describe something changes the narrative because that was never the plan, in the and you could go see what we're talking about. It's on our YouTube channel. It's a horror one shot called The Box. But the way Dean described his actions actually changed the way the story was going to be because of the description. It wasn't anything mechanical. It was his description that changed the narrative. And that's a perfect example about the Cypher mindset. If you want to see,
Yeah, you want to
huge fish tank, giant shark, and I think the players from that game are in this chat. So
Yeah, that was a really fun game.
It was crazy. And so we're going to move on to the final pillar, which is social.
Oh,
And of course, we can just say it from beginning to end. The social aspect of Cypher System is paramount. This is this is the epitome of the Cypher mindset because that's where that true interaction, that true interplay comes in. Um,
so the social aspect was actually one of my favorite parts. Or excuse me, not my favorite parts. I mean, it in turn became my favorite part. But my home game, my players really enjoyed that social aspect of talking to one another, figuring out what they were going to do within the story, and also role playing with each other. Like again, I've seen it a lot with you guys, with Dean and Anthony and a few other experienced players, but in my home game, that was the most in character conflict within a group I've ever seen. Like there were PvP roles constantly for things they were trying to do, and it's only because they were really getting into their character. And again, this harkens back to the social aspect because they were having fun out of character, talking about, hey, my character would totally do this, and they were having a lot of fun with that social part because it also drove the story a bit because it encouraged them to not only think out of character, like, hey, what are we gonna do? It said, hey, in character, they were having fun, again, kind of socializing as their characters with one another.
Right.
It's just out of character, in character, it just does it all so well.
Well, I'll put it this way. The, last year I ran it was either 6 or 8 part superhero style. It was more gritty, more reality based superhero. But there was one scene. There was actually a few, but there was one scene I remember very vividly. And I mean, honestly, it was like really emotional. It was freaking awesome. I mean, I had a little tear in my eye. I had to walk away from. I walked away from the game that day, going, "Damn, that was awesome." You know, and the cool part about it was me as an NPC, and then the two players, and the conversation. It was just this organic thing that unfolded. It was great. It was phenomenal, and Cypher System encourages that. Not only does it encourage it, but to me, that's one of the rewards for it. That's how that is such an important aspect to that mindset with Cypher.
I understand that social gaming, like social character interactions, isn't everyone's cup of tea. Some people don't, it's their least favorite thing about RPGs. It happens to be my favorite. I like interacting with other players at the table, but I understand that that's not like the key component for most people. RPG, tabletop RPGing, social might be the least important thing. But I think that the Cypher mindset encourages you to at least attempt it. You don't have to be the best, the best improv actor, the best dialogue person at the table. But with all the connections it gives you beforehand, at least you have an idea of what to say when you're interacting with another character. Because you have some plot threads to build upon, right?
Right.
It's definitely awesome to have like, especially for an like maybe an inexperienced or new role player, to have that stuff baked into the sheet. Because not only do you have like the player connections and whatnot in your background, you also have your descriptor, a word that kind of describes your character. You can have a way to kind of you have a mechanical thing to fall back to on your sheet. Excuse me, not even specifically mechanical. You don't have to even worry about the mechanical benefits. You have all this flavorful fluff on your sheet that gives you these seeds to let you talk in the story or let you input into the story.
Yeah,
Now, that's perfect what you said. It gives your character personality. It gives, and like, yeah, perfect. You said a narrative wrapping. It fleshes out your character for you, and for the person that's not used to interacting, you know, socially with other PCs at the table, you don't have to develop that personality. It's telling you in the character creation, my character's creative, or my character's shy, or my character's determined, whatever it is, right?
right.
You
And
already know beforehand.
well, that's the reality. Like Al said, not just the descriptor, but it just fall back on your entire sentence. If you fall back on your character sentence, then you're always in that good spot, you know. And I think that's one of the coolest aspects about it. When you sit there and I'm a rugged warrior who meets out justice. So that automatically should have a picture blossom in your mind. If you're playing a post-apocalyptic game, if you're playing, like prime example, playing Numenera, you know, I'm a rugged glaive, and so I'm thinking the
It's
grizzled,
how do they interact socially with
right?
the with,
And that's what I'm saying, because I'm thinking the grizzled stoic guy that lives in the wasteland, but you know he's fair. He believes in honor, so he's got a code of honor. So and so all of that is going to build on how I'm going to interact with people socially. That might be my character that says a few words, but they're always on point. You know,
um Infinite Concept brought up a excellent point. Even if you're not the sort of player that likes to be verbal, like you're not comfortable being verbal at the table, at least you have an understanding of how your character would behave
right?
in the surroundings
Exactly.
through your sentence. Even if you're not the guy that wants to be, you're not comfortable being verbal at the table. And I will always say this: I'm an outspoken person. I got a big mouth. Everybody knows that, right? But I would never force someone to be uncomfortable if that's not what they want to do. Like if you're not, if you could still enjoy role playing games without being out in the forefront in the social interactions.
Absolutely.
Everyone gets their enjoyment a different way, and it's okay.
And that's important. Al, you got any final thoughts to throw out there?
Not really. Just that what Anthony said is kind of important to have mentioned out loud. Like, not everybody does enjoy chatting it up, being like having the spotlight on them while they role play. Like, again, some people thrive on it, but others like to be like sort of like a secondary character or a background character. And again, if you're not doing some produced thing like on Twitch, like this is just your home game or you're just playing online with your buddies, like there's literally nothing wrong with enjoying that back seat. Should you enjoy it? Like, again, and you still have, like Infinite Construct said, you still have ways to interact with the story even if you don't want to be forefront in the spotlight. You can still have skills that are pertinent to the setting and say even now and then, like, hey, my character can do this. Like, it's more than okay. And again, Cypher System, I was rambling here. It's just awesome. Sorry.
And only final thought I'm going to say is this: everybody who's out there, whether you've been following us or you haven't been following us, or whether this is your first time watching one of our shows or not, come on over to Cypher Unlimited and try to paradigm shift. You know, come on, hop on a ride. I'll run a game for you. Spigs will run a game for you. I'll run a game. And it's kind of funny because we all have our own style, but we all kind of work well together. We play well together. the paradigm shift is a beautiful thing because you can take that back to your other games as well. So,
Uh,
Anthony?
my final thought on the Cypher mindset, I think the Cypher mindset boils down to this. It's not what your character gets from the story or the narrative, is what the group collective does. And everything Cypher, until everything's the way Cypher's designed, the way it's run, the way it's GM, the way it's played, leads to that. It's a group storytelling experience, a cinematic experience, and all the mechanics leads you to that. So if I could give you any bit of advice, is it's not about your character, it's about everyone's enjoyment at the table.
Exactly.
Agreed.
That was my, again, as my final thing. That was the biggest thing that drew me, or excuse me, that made me love Cypher System when I was first introduced to it, was the fact that everybody at the table was telling the story together. It wasn't, hey, the players are trying to beat the challenge that the GM is presenting to them. I mean, of course, that is part of Cypher System as well because there's challenges within the story, but it was more of a collaborative storytelling experience rather than of us versus them mentality. It was a fun shared experience, and that really what the Cypher mindset is that you're here to have a fun shared experience. It's not an adversarial. It's not how can I break the system. It's not how can I get the highest level, deal the most. Like, it's all about advancing a story, telling a nice shared experience together.
And I'm looking here in the chat, and I just have to say, all you people in the chat, they're talking about running some one shots. Put them up, because if they're in the time slot that I can play, I'm coming to bogart your game. I'm letting you know now, because I don't get to play a lot. I get to run a lot, so I'm ready to play.
And I'm definitely going to be running some stuff soon. Hopefully, March is my month to get some games in. I got some pretty cool ideas and one shot kookiness I want to try out. So, and I want to play with all of y'all. Some people in chat I have played with, some people I haven't. And, let's get it cracking. So, I'll just do the shameless plug promotion. If you like Cypher Unlimited and you like what we do, please follow us, give us a follow here on Twitch, or go to our YouTube channel and give us a follow there. We're trying to get our YouTube subs up. We post content every week. Hopefully you could follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, follow us on the Cypher Unlimited Discord, which is the largest fan-run Discord server out there. It's like what Dean said. If you want a game, just come over there and game with us. We got close to 4,000 members on there. We'd love to have you. Visit our Ko-fi and give us a little donation there. Our videos are always free, but it helps us out with little things like Zoom costs. Or go to our I don't have usually a Cypher Unlimited shirt on, but I do have a hat on. Go to our Cypher Unlimited store, online store, and pick up some cool merch. You know what I mean? Like the wonderful shirt Dean got. It's awesome. Every little bit helps us, and like always, content is always free. We love you guys. Whether you do it or you don't, we still love you. It doesn't matter. So, come game with us.
Yeah.
Hey, first of all, it's the D&D cartoon shirt. One of the greatest cartoons of all time.
Yeah, and yeah, just as usual, it's been a blast, y'all. Don't really have any much more final to say other than final notes I've said. So I'm just gonna wrap it up here. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. It's been a blast as usual. We'll see y'all next week for our next video. We don't know what that's gonna be about yet. We're pretty off the cuff when it comes to these things.
It's time to raid Rule of Lore.
Exactly. Yes, we're gonna do that. But yeah, from us at the CU, we will see you later.